The cantina on Nexus Prime was dark and smoky. Strange alien music played softly in the background while creatures from a dozen different worlds sat at tables, drinking and talking quietly. The air smelled of exotic spices and fermented drinks. That would kill most humans in minutes. Jorik. Helm sat in the corner booth, checking his recording device for the third time. He was nervous. The young journalist had traveled for 6 weeks to reach this remote space station, jumping through hyperspace, on 3 different cargo ships just to get here. His editor back at Galactic News Network thought he was crazy. Most people thought the story he was chasing was just another spacer legend, something drunk pilots made up to scare new recruits. But Jorik had done his research. He had spent months tracking down veterans from the human Zephrian War, and most of them refused to talk. The few who did speak only whispered fragments before changing the subject. Something had happened during that war 20 years ago. Something that made the mighty Zephrian Empire, conquerors of 17 worlds, suddenly stop fighting and beg for peace. The cantina door slid open with a soft hiss. Jorik looked up and felt his stomach drop. The creature that entered was massive, nearly 8 feet tall, with 6 limbs and scales that shifted from deep purple to black in the dim light. 3 of those limbs had been replaced with crude cybernetic parts that whirred and clicked with each movement. Scars covered the visible parts of his body, some clearly from energy weapons, others from what looked like primitive projectile wounds. This was Kethver, former squadron leader of the Zephrian Third Fleet. The alien moved slowly through the cantina, his compound eyes scanning the room before settling on Jorik. Other patrons quickly looked away, or found excuses to leave their tables. Even here, in this neutral space where warriors from 100 conflicts came to drink away their memories, Kethver commanded fear and respect. He slid into the booth across from Jorik with surprising grace for such a large creature. His cybernetic arm clanked against the metal table. "You are the one who has been asking questions," Kethver said. His voice came through a translation device attached to his throat, giving his words a mechanical edge. "The journalist who wants to know about the humans." Jorik nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this must be difficult." Kethver made a sound that might have been laughter, but it held no humor. "Difficult. Yes, that is one word for it." He gestured to a passing server, a small blue creature. "With too many arms. Bring me kelp wine. A strong kind?" The server scurried away quickly. Jorik noticed that none of the other aliens in the cantina were looking in their direction, but he could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew who Kethver was, and everyone knew better than to eavesdrop on his conversations. "Before we begin," Kethver continued, "you must understand something. What I am about to tell you will never be officially confirmed by any government. The Galactic Council has classified all records from the war. They do not want other species to know what really happened." "Why?" Jorik asked, leaning forward. Kethver's compound eyes fixed on him. "Because they are afraid. We are all afraid." The server returned with a large glass filled with dark green liquid. Kethver drank deeply before setting it down with a heavy thud. "I was young when the war began," he said, "barely past my 3rd molting, eager to prove myself in battle. I had trained at the academy on Zephyr Prime for 6 cycles. I knew every strategy, every tactic our military had developed over 3,000 years of conquest. I thought I understood war." Jorik activated his recording device, hoping Kethver would not notice. The alien continued without pause. "The human colony of Haven's Rest appeared on our sensors like a gift from the void. A single world, recently settled, defended by what our intelligence reported as farmers and merchants. The population was less than 50,000. They had no fleet, no orbital defenses, no energy shields. Their technology was primitive by our standards. Kethver paused to drink again, and Jorik could see his hands shaking slightly. Our commanders were excited. Haven's Rest would be an easy victory to add to the Empire's glory. The High Command decided to use it as a training exercise for new squadrons like mine. They said it would be good practice for real warfare. What made Haven's Rest seem like an easy target? Jorik asked carefully. Everything, Kethver replied. They had been settled for only 5 years. Most of their buildings were simple prefabricated structures. They grew food crops and raised livestock. Their orbital traffic consisted of a few cargo ships making supply runs. Our deep space scouts reported no military installations, no weapon factories, no signs of preparation for war. Alien's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. We were so confident that the invasion fleet consisted of only 12 ships. 12 ships to conquer an entire world. In our previous campaigns, we had used hundreds of vessels to take defended planets. But the humans seemed so weak, so unprepared. Jorik made notes as Kethver spoke, trying not to interrupt the flow of memories. I remember the briefing before we entered their system. Admiral Vyses stood before us, his scales bright with pride. He told us that this would be the shortest campaign in Zephrian history. 3 days, he said. 3 days to land our forces, secure the major settlements, and accept their surrender. Kethver drained his glass and signaled for another. The humans had been monitoring our approach for weeks before we arrived. We knew this, of course. It is impossible to hide a fleet moving through hyperspace. But we expected them to panic, to send desperate messages begging for mercy, or to attempt to evacuate their world. What did they do instead? Jorik prompted. Nothing, Kethver said flatly. They did absolutely nothing. No messages, no evacuation ships, no signs of panic. When our fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their system, the planet continued its normal routine as if we did not exist. The second glass of kelp wine arrived, and Kethver began drinking it more slowly. This confused our commanders. In every previous invasion, the target species had reacted to our presence immediately. They would try to negotiate or flee or send out desperate calls for help. But the humans acted as if our warships were merchant vessels making a routine delivery. Did that worry anyone? It should have, Kethver admitted, but we were arrogant. We had conquered 17 worlds. We had never met a species that could match our military might. We assumed the humans were simply too primitive to understand the danger they faced. The alien veteran stared into his drink for a long moment before continuing. Admiral Vyses ordered the fleet to move into orbit around Haven's Rest, standard intimidation formation, designed to demonstrate our overwhelming firepower. We broadcast surrender demands in their language, giving them 12 hours to respond. And they responded exactly at the 12-hour mark. A single transmission from their planetary government. Kethver's voice grew quiet. It was only 4 words long. Jorik waited, sensing this was important. Come and take it, Kethver said slowly. That was their entire response to our surrender demand. Come and take it. The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the very air was listening. We should have left then, Kethver continued. Any species crazy enough to dare a Zephrian. Fleet with 4 words was clearly insane. But Admiral Vyses saw it as an insult to the Empire's honor. He ordered the invasion to proceed immediately. Kethver looked directly at Jorik, his compound eyes reflecting the dim lights of the cantina. That was our first mistake. We thought we were fighting farmers and shopkeepers. We had no idea we were about to face the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Kethver ordered his 3rd glass of kelp wine and stared at it for a long moment before continuing his story. The cantina around them had grown quieter as other patrons sensed the weight of the conversation happening in the corner booth. The Invasion began at dawn on their world, Kethver said. Our dropships launched from the fleet in perfect formation. 60 vessels carrying 3,000 of our finest warriors. I was leading Squadron 7, 12 ships with 200 soldiers under my command. Jorik leaned forward, his recording device capturing every word. Our intelligence had identified the largest settlement as the primary target. A place called New Boston, where nearly half their population lived. The plan was simple. Land our forces around the city, secure the government buildings, and wait for their surrender. We had done this same operation dozens of times on other worlds. Kethver took a small sip of his drink, his cybernetic hand making soft whirring sounds as it gripped the glass. As we approached the planet's surface, everything looked exactly as our scouts had reported. Farms stretched across the continents. Small towns connected by simple roads. A few industrial areas, but nothing that suggested military production. It was a peaceful agricultural world, just as we expected. What happened when you landed? Jorik asked. We never made it to the ground, Kethver said quietly. The first wave of dropships was 3 minutes from landing when the missiles started flying. The alien veteran's compound eyes seemed to lose focus as he remembered that day. They came from everywhere, from barns that looked empty, from grain silos that should have held wheat, from irrigation ditches that we thought were just part of their farming system. Hundreds of missiles, all fired at exactly the same moment. Kethver's voice grew harder. In 30 seconds, we lost 18 dropships and nearly 600 warriors. I watched Squadron 3 get completely wiped out by missiles that came from what looked like an abandoned farm. The explosion lit up the sky like a small sun. Jorik made notes quickly, trying to capture the intensity of Kethver's memories. Our remaining ships scattered and tried to find safe landing zones, but the humans seemed to have weapons hidden everywhere. My squadron managed to land in what we thought was empty grassland, 5 kilometers from New Boston. We lost 2 more. Ships to mines that were buried in the field. Mines in a farm field? Jorik asked. Not just mines, Kethver replied. The entire area was a trap. As soon as we landed and began moving toward the city, we started taking fire from positions we could not see. The humans had built hidden bunkers under their farmland. They could pop up, fire at us, and disappear again before we could return fire. The alien veteran flexed his cybernetic fingers, the mechanical joints clicking softly. That was when we realized that our intelligence reports were completely wrong. This was not a simple farming colony. These humans had been preparing for war. How could your intelligence have missed something like that? Jorik asked. Because the humans are experts at deception, Kethver said. Everything we saw from orbit was real. They really were farmers growing food crops. They really did have small towns and peaceful communities. But they had built their entire defense system to look like normal civilian infrastructure. Kethver paused to drink again, and Jorik noticed that the aliens' hands were shaking more noticeably now. We learned later that their leader was a human named John Carter. He had been a military commander in their species' own wars before coming to Havens. Rest. When the colonists first arrived, Carter convinced them that they needed to be ready to defend themselves. What kind of preparations had they made? Everything, Kethver said with something that sounded like admiration. They had spent 5 years turning their entire world into a fortress. Every building had multiple purposes. Their schools doubled as command centers. Their hospitals were also ammunition storage facilities. Their farms grew food, but they also concealed weapon systems. The alien veteran leaned back in his seat, his scarred face thoughtful. But the most impressive thing was not their weapons or their fortifications. It was their people. We expected panic when our invasion began. We expected civilians to run away or hide in their homes. Instead, they joined the fight. Civilians fought against your soldiers? Children as young as Ung. 10 years old served as scouts and messengers. Elderly humans who could barely walk operated communication equipment and spotting systems. Every single person on that world had a role in their defense plan. Kethver's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I remember watching a human female, maybe 60 years old, calmly directing artillery fire while making sandwiches for the soldiers. She would call in coordinates for our positions and ask if anyone wanted lunch. The humans treated warfare like it was just another job that needed to be done. Jorik found this hard to believe. They were not afraid? Oh, they were afraid, Kethver said. I could smell their fear. But they fought anyway. Fear did not stop them from doing what they thought was necessary. The alien veteran stared into his drink for a moment before continuing. 3 days into the invasion, we had managed to secure only 2 small settlements. The cost had been enormous. We had lost over half our original force, and the humans seemed to have unlimited supplies and reinforcements. Where were their reinforcements coming from? That was the terrifying part, Kethver said. They were not getting reinforcements from off-world. Every new fighter was someone who had been living peacefully in the countryside just days before. Farmers would put down their tools, pick up weapons, and become soldiers. Shop owners would close their stores and join the resistance. Even their medical staff fought when necessary. Kethver finished his 3rd glass and signaled for another, though Jorik noticed the server seemed reluctant to approach their table. The human who impressed me most was their military deputy, a female named Lisa Manning. She had been a naval officer in their space forces before retiring to Haven's Rest. When the invasion began, she took command of their orbital defense systems. I thought you said they had no orbital defenses. They did not when we first scanned the planet, Kethver replied. But the humans had hidden components throughout their settlements. When the invasion began, they assembled their defense systems in less than 6 hours. Manning coordinated the entire operation while under bombardment from our fleet. The alien veteran's cybernetic arm twitched as he remembered. Manning managed to damage 2 of our cruisers using weapons built from mining equipment and civilian electronics. She turned their cargo shuttles into guided missiles and their communication satellites into targeting systems. It should not have been possible, but the humans made it work through pure determination and creativity. How did your commanders respond to these setbacks? Admiral Dizes was furious. He had promised the High Command a quick victory, and instead, we were losing ships and soldiers every day. He ordered more aggressive tactics and called for reinforcements from the Second Fleet. Kethver's voice became bitter. That was our second major mistake. We thought the problem was that we had not brought enough force to the fight. We did not understand that the humans were not fighting a normal war. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their entire way of life. The 4th glass of kelp wine arrived, and Kethver drank deeply before continuing. By the end of the first week, it was clear that our 3-day campaign had become a siege. The humans controlled most of their world, and we held only a few heavily defended positions around our landing zones. Every attempt to advance resulted in heavy casualties. What made the humans so effective in combat? They refused to fight the way wars are supposed to be fought, Kethver said. There were no grand battles, no honorable single combat, no formal surrenders. The humans used every dirty trick, every underhanded tactic, every piece of terrain to their advantage. The alien veteran looked directly at Jorik, but most importantly, they never gave up. No matter how hopeless the situation looked, no matter how many of them died, the survivors would regroup and continue fighting. We had never encountered anything like it in 3,000 years of conquest. Kethver's 4th glass sat half empty as he continued his story. The cantina had grown even quieter around them, and Jorik noticed that several other patrons had quietly left. Word was spreading that the old Zephrian veteran was talking about. The war. The siege lasted 6 months, Kethver said, his voice heavy with memory. 6 months of the most brutal fighting I have ever experienced. What was supposed to be a 3-day training exercise became a nightmare that haunts me to this day. Jorik checked his recording device again, making sure he was capturing every word. Admiral Thies received reinforcements from the Second Fleet. After 2 weeks, another 8 ships with fresh troops. He was confident that the additional forces would break the human resistance quickly. Kethver made that sound that might have been laughter again, but it was filled with bitterness. The humans welcomed our reinforcements by destroying our main supply depot. A team of 12 humans infiltrated our most secure position and planted explosives throughout the facility. They walked through our guard posts like ghosts, completed their mission, and disappeared back into the countryside. How could 12 humans penetrate your defenses? Because they did not fight like warriors, Kethver replied. They fought like hunters. Patient, careful, willing to wait for days to find the perfect moment to strike. The team leader was a human named Gary Miller. He had been a hunter on their homeworld before coming to Haven's Rest. The alien veteran flexed his cybernetic fingers again, a nervous habit Jorik was beginning to recognize. Miller and his team studied our patrol patterns for a week before making their move. They knew exactly when and where every guard would be. They used our own routines against us, turning our discipline into a weakness. What happened after they destroyed your supplies? Everything became more difficult. We had to rely on drops from orbit, but the humans had hidden anti-aircraft weapons throughout their territory. Every supply run became a dangerous mission. We lost more ships bringing food and ammunition to our troops than we did in direct combat. Kethver paused to drink, and Jorik could see the strain in the alien's posture. But the worst part was not knowing where the humans would strike next. They had abandoned their cities and towns, melting into the countryside like smoke. We controlled the settlements, but the humans controlled everything else. Did your forces try to pursue them into the wilderness? Of course we did, Kethver said. That was another mistake. The humans knew every tree, every rock, every stream on their world. We were fighting them on ground they had walked for 5 years, against people who had spent that time learning every possible hiding place and escape route. The alien veteran's compound eyes seemed to dim as he remembered. I lost my first limb during a patrol in the northern forests. We were tracking what we thought was a small group of human fighters, 50 of our best scouts against maybe 10 humans. It should have been an easy hunt. What went wrong? Everything, Kethver said simply. The humans led us deeper and deeper, into the woods, always staying just out of reach. They left obvious tracks that were easy to follow. They wanted us to chase them. Kethver raised his cybernetic arm, the mechanical joints clicking softly in the quiet cantina. After 3 hours of pursuit, we found ourselves in a narrow valley with steep sides. That was when we realized we had been herded like livestock into a trap. The humans had explosives planted throughout the valley walls. When they triggered the charges, half the mountainside came down on top of us. Jorik winced, imagining the scene. 23 of my soldiers died instantly. The rest of us were buried under tons of rock and dirt. It took 6 hours for rescue teams to dig us out. My left arm was crushed beyond repair, but I was one of the lucky ones. How many humans were involved in setting up that trap? 7, Kethver said quietly. 7 humans destroyed 50 of our elite scouts with nothing but primitive explosives and knowledge of their terrain. The leader was a female named Nancy Brooks. She had been a mining engineer before the war started. The alien veteran drank again, more slowly this time. Brooks used her knowledge of geology to identify the weak points in the valley walls. She spent weeks placing charges in exactly the right locations to bring down the maximum amount of rock. It was the work of an expert, but she was supposed to be a civilian. Did all the humans have military training? That was what made them so dangerous, Kethver replied. Most of them had no formal military experience, but they all had skills that could be used for warfare. Engineers became explosive experts. Hunters became snipers. Farmers became experts at camouflage and concealment. Kethver's voice grew quieter, forcing Jorik to lean forward to hear him clearly. But the human who scared me most was a doctor named Patricia Wells. She ran the medical facility in New Boston before the war. When we finally captured the city, we expected to find a normal hospital with frightened medical staff. What did you find instead? We found a fortress, Kethver said. Wells had turned her hospital into a combination medical center and weapons factory. The basement levels contained workshops where they built improvised explosives and modified civilian equipment into military hardware. The alien veteran's scarred face showed something that might have been respect. But Wells herself continued to work as a doctor throughout the siege. She treated wounded soldiers from both sides, human and Zephrian. When we captured the hospital, she was operating on one of our injured warriors. She helped your soldiers? She said that wounded beings needed medical care, regardless of which side they fought for, Kethver replied. It was a concept we had never encountered before. On every other world we had conquered, medical facilities were legitimate military targets. But Wells made it clear that her hospital would treat anyone who needed help. Kethver paused, staring into his drink. Admiral, Dizes ordered me to arrest Wells and her staff as enemy combatants. But when I entered the operating room, she was saving the life of my communications officer, who had been badly injured in a bomb attack. Her hands were covered in his blood, and she was working to repair damage to his breathing organs. What did you do? I waited, Kethver said simply. I stood there with my weapon ready while she finished the surgery. It took 4 hours. She never looked at me, never asked for mercy, never stopped working. She just continued doing her job. The alien veteran's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. When she finally finished, she turned to me and said that my officer would recover, fully if he received proper care during the next few days. Then she asked if I needed medical attention for my own wounds. Were you injured? I had taken shrapnel from the same bomb that hurt my officer, Kethver admitted. Nothing serious, but it was bleeding and starting to become infected. Wells treated my wounds while I held her under arrest. She worked carefully and professionally, as if I was not her enemy. Jorik made notes frantically, trying to capture the emotion in Kethver's voice. That was when I began to understand that we were not fighting normal warriors. The humans were fighting a total war, but they maintained their principles even in the middle of combat. They would kill us without hesitation when necessary, but they would also save our lives when possible. Kethver finished his 4th glass and sat back in his seat. Admiral Dizes did not understand this. He saw their mercy as weakness and their principles as foolishness. He decided that if we could not break their military resistance, we would target their civilians and force them to surrender. The cantina seemed to grow colder around them as Kethver spoke his next words. That decision led to the darkest day of the war, and the moment when we truly learned what humans are capable of when they become angry. Kethver sat silent for several minutes, staring at his empty glass. When the server approached to offer another drink, the alien veteran waved him away with his cybernetic hand. Jorik waited patiently, sensing that the next part of the story would be the most difficult for Kethver to tell. What I am about to tell you happened on the 123rd day of the siege, Kethver finally said. It was the day that changed everything. The day that Admiral Dizes made the worst decision of his military career. The alien veteran's compound eyes focused on something far beyond the cantina walls. Our forces had been making slow progress, We had secured 3 major settlements and established supply lines between them. The humans were still fighting, but their attacks had become less frequent. Admiral Theises believed we were finally wearing down their resistance. What made him think that? Jorik asked quietly. Intelligence reports suggested that the human leadership was having disagreements about strategy. Some wanted to continue the guerrilla campaign, while others thought they should negotiate a surrender to save civilian lives. Theises saw this as a sign of weakness. Kethver's scarred face twisted with what looked like pain. The admiral called a meeting of all senior commanders. He said that the siege was taking too long and costing too much. The high command on Zephyr Prime was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about why a simple farming world was causing so many casualties. So what did he decide to do? He decided to force the humans to surrender by targeting their non-combatants. Kethver said, his voice barely above a whisper. Theises ordered the orbital bombardment of Millerville, a small town with no military value. 300 civilians lived there, mostly elderly humans and families with young children. Jorik felt. His stomach turned cold. Did you object to the order? Several of us tried, Kethver replied. Commander Vexstar argued that attacking civilians would violate the Galactic War Codes. Squadron leader Mordock pointed out that such an action might unite the human resistance instead of breaking it. But Admiral Theises had made up his mind. Alien veteran's cybernetic fingers clenched and unclenched repeatedly. The bombardment lasted 10 minutes. When it was over, Millerville was a crater in the ground. Every building destroyed, every civilian dead. We had committed mass murder to send a message. Kethver paused, and Jorik could see that the alien was struggling with the memory. What was the human response? Jorik asked gently. Silence. Kethver said, for 12 hours after the bombardment, we heard nothing from the human forces. No radio transmissions, no attacks on our positions, no movement in the areas we were monitoring. It was as if the entire resistance had simply disappeared. That must have seemed like good news to your commanders. Admiral Theises thought he had. Juan, Kethver confirmed. He prepared a surrender demand to broadcast across the planet. He was confident that the humans would give up rather than risk more civilian casualties. The alien veteran looked directly at Jorik, his compound eyes, reflecting the cantina's dim lights. Then the attacks began. Not the careful, planned strikes we had grown used to, but something completely different. Every Zephrian position on the planet came under assault at exactly the same moment. Coordinated attacks? More than coordinated. Kethver said, it was as if the entire human population had become a single military unit overnight. Resistance cells that had been operating independently suddenly began working together with perfect timing and communication. Kethver's voice grew stronger as he continued, as if the memory of human fury gave him energy. The first target was our main communications array. A team of humans led by someone called Ryan Brooks penetrated our most secure facility and destroyed our ability to coordinate between ground forces and the fleet. They used nothing but determination and equipment they had built from spare parts. How? Did they get past your security? They came through the sewage system, Kethver said with something that sounded like admiration. Brooks and 5 others crawled through waste pipes for 3 kilometers to reach the communications center. They spent 18 hours moving through the tunnels, breathing toxic fumes and fighting through obstacles that should have killed them. The alien veteran shook his head slowly. When they reached the center, they had to climb 30 meters straight, up through a maintenance shaft while carrying their explosives. 3 of them died during the climb, but the survivors completed the mission. They destroyed communication equipment worth more than most planets and cut our ground forces off from orbital support. What happened to Brooks and his team? They fought their way out through the main entrance, Kethver replied. 600 of our soldiers were stationed at that facility, but Brooks and his surviving teammates managed to escape in the confusion after the explosions. They killed 47 of our warriors and wounded over 100 more. Kethver paused to signal for another drink after all, his hands shaking more noticeably now. But that was just the beginning. While Brooks was attacking our communications, other human teams were hitting targets across the planet. They struck our fuel depots, our weapon storage facilities, our medical stations, and our command posts all at the same time. How could they coordinate such a large operation without your intelligence detecting it? Because they had been planning it since the siege began, Kethver said. Every human on the planet had been assigned a role in what they called Operation Fury. They spent 4 months preparing for a single night of coordinated attacks, waiting for the right moment to launch everything at once. A 5th glass of kelp wine arrived, and Kethvar drank deeply before continuing. The human who impressed me most that night was a female named Amy Parker. She was a maintenance worker at their spaceport before the war, but during the siege she had become one of their most effective fighters. What did she do? Parker was assigned to hold the Westbridge Crossing, a strategic point that controlled access to 3 of our major positions. Intelligence said she had maybe 20 fighters with her, facing over 200 of our assault troops. Kethver's cybernetic arm whirred as he gestured. The bridge was narrow, only wide enough for 2 vehicles to cross at the same time. Parker's team had spent weeks preparing defensive positions on the far side, but everyone knew they could not hold against a determined assault by superior numbers. How long did they hold out? 4 hours, Kethver said quietly. 4 hours. Against impossible odds. But that was not the remarkable part. The remarkable part was how Parker fought. The alien veteran leaned forward, his voice intense. She was shot 7 times during the battle. 7 times. Any one of those wounds should have put her out of action, but she continued fighting. When her primary weapon was destroyed, she picked up weapons from fallen soldiers. When her ammunition ran out, she threw rocks and debris. Why did not she retreat when the situation became hopeless? Because her orders were to hold the bridge until the main assault teams completed their missions, Kethver replied. Parker knew that if our reinforcements crossed that bridge, they could reach 3 different human positions and potentially stop the entire operation. Kethver's voice dropped to almost a whisper. In the final hour of the battle, Parker was the only human defender still alive. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, had no ammunition left, and faced 50 fresh Zephrian warriors. But she would not abandon her position. What did she do? She detonated the explosives that her team had placed under the bridge supports, Kethver said. Parker destroyed the entire crossing, killing herself and 15 of our soldiers, to prevent us from reinforcing our other positions. The cantina was completely silent now, except for Kethver's voice. When we found her body in the wreckage, she was still clutching the detonator. Parker had held that bridge for 4 hours and then made the ultimate sacrifice to complete her mission. That is when I truly understood what we were fighting against. Kethver finished his drink and looked at Jorik with tired eyes. The humans were not just defending their world. They were fighting with the fury of a species that refuses to be conquered, no matter the cost. Kethver sat in silence for a long time after finishing his account of Amy Parker's sacrifice. The cantina around them had grown nearly empty, with only a few patrons remaining at distant tables. Jorik waited patiently, sensing that the alien veteran was gathering strength for the final part of his story. Operation Fury lasted 3 days. Kethver finally continued. By the time it ended, we had lost 60% of our ground forces and most of our equipment. But that was not why the war ended. The war ended because of what we discovered about the humans during those 3 days. What did you discover? Jorik asked softly. We discovered that Haven's Rest was not unique, Kethver replied. Every human world was prepared to fight the same way. Every colony had people like John Carter and Amy Parker. Every settlement had turned itself into a fortress, just waiting for someone to attack them. The alien veteran's compound eyes focused on Jorik with startling intensity. Admiral Vise received a communication from the human government 3 days after Operation Fury ended. It was not a surrender offer. It was an intelligence report about Zephrian military capabilities, including details about our ship designs, our weapon systems, and our battle tactics that only our own high command should have known. How could humans have access to classified Zephrian information? Because they had been studying us for 20 years, Kethver said. Long before we ever heard of Haven's Rest, human intelligence agents had been gathering information about every major military power in the galaxy. They knew we were coming before we knew they existed. Jorik felt a chill run down his spine. They were spying on your empire? Not just spying, Kethver corrected. They were preparing. The humans had identified the Zephrian Empire as a potential threat decades before first contact. They studied our expansion patterns, our military doctrine, our weaknesses, and our strengths. When we finally encountered them, they already knew exactly how to fight us. The alien veteran signaled for one final drink, his cybernetic hand moving with practiced precision. The communication also included detailed information about 17 other alien civilizations that the humans considered potential enemies. They had prepared countermeasures for all of us, including weapons designs specifically created to exploit our individual biological and technological vulnerabilities. Did they threaten to share this information with other species? Worse, Kethver said. They proved they could strike at targets throughout Zephrian space whenever they chose. The message included real-time images from inside our military. Headquarters on Zephyr Prime, taken while Admiral Vises was reading their communication. Jorik's mouth went dry. Human agents had infiltrated your homeworld? Human agents had infiltrated everywhere, Kethver replied. Our research stations, our fleet bases, our government facilities, our industrial centers. They had been watching. Use for years, learning our routines, mapping our defenses, and positioning themselves to cause maximum damage if we ever became enemies. The alien veteran's scarred face showed a mixture of fear and respect. But the most terrifying part of their message was not the threat of sabotage or the promise of retaliation. It was their offer of friendship. They offered to make peace. They offered to make us allies, Kethver corrected. The humans said they had been preparing to fight us because they thought conflict was inevitable. But they also said they would prefer to work together as partners in exploring and protecting the galaxy. Kethver's voice grew quiet again. They offered to share their defensive technologies with us. They offered to provide intelligence about other hostile species. They offered to help us improve our own military capabilities. All they asked in return was that we stop trying to conquer their worlds and respect their right to exist. What did Admiral Vise decide? Admiral Vises wanted to continue fighting, Kethver said. He believed that accepting the human offer would be a sign of weakness. He argued that the Zephrian Empire could not afford to show fear in front of other potential enemies. The alien veteran's cybernetic fingers drummed against the table. But the High Command had received their own copy of the human intelligence report. They knew that continuing the war would be suicide. If the humans could infiltrate Zephyr Prime itself, they could destroy our entire civilization whenever they chose. So the Empire surrendered? The Empire negotiated, Kethver corrected. The final peace talks took place on a neutral station, much like this one. I was selected to represent the military perspective during the negotiations. Kethver paused. As his final drink arrived, then continued. The human delegation was led by John Carter, the same man who had organized Haven's Rest defenses. I expected to meet a hardened warrior, someone filled with anger and hatred after months of brutal warfare. What was he actually like? He was a farmer, Kethver said simply. Carter arrived at the peace talks wearing simple civilian clothes, carrying a briefcase full of agricultural reports and terraforming proposals. He spoke about soil conditions and crop rotation schedules with the same intensity that he had used to plan military operations. The alien veteran shook his head in amazement. Carter treated the peace negotiations like a business meeting between neighbors. He wanted to establish trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and joint research projects. The war, to him, had been an unfortunate misunderstanding that was now resolved. Did he seem angry about the civilian casualties? He mourned the dead on both sides, Kethver replied. Carter spoke about Zephrian soldiers by name, describing their families and their service records. He knew more about our casualties than some of our own commanders did, but he did not seek revenge or demand punishment for war crimes. Kethver's voice filled with something that sounded like wonder. Carter said that holding grudges was a waste of energy that could be better spent building a peaceful future. He wanted to establish schools where human and Zephrian children could learn together. He wanted to create joint colonies where both species could share knowledge and resources. That must have been confusing for your delegation. It was terrifying, Kethver admitted. We had spent 3,000 years dealing with enemies who either surrendered completely or fought to the death. The humans did neither. They had won a decisive victory, but chose to offer partnership instead of demanding submission. The alien veteran drank slowly, savoring what would be his last glass of the evening. The peace treaty we signed established humanity as an equal partner with the Zephrian Empire, not as a conquered species or a tributary state, but as genuine allies with full rights and protections under galactic law. Has the alliance been successful? Beyond anyone's expectations, Kethver said. Human engineers have helped us improve our ship designs. Human scientists have shared medical advances that have saved millions of Zephrian lives. Human farmers have taught us agricultural techniques that have ended food shortages on 12 of our worlds. The alien veteran's compound eyes seemed to brighten. But more importantly, other species have learned from our example. The Rigelian Federation, the Centauri Union, and the Vegan Collective have all established peaceful relationships with humanity. The humans have become the galaxy's most effective diplomats, using the same skills they showed in warfare to prevent conflicts, instead of fighting them. Kethver finished his drink and carefully placed the empty glass on the table. That is why I'm telling you this story, young journalist. The galaxy believes that humans are just another species among many. They think that human military success was based on superior technology or tactical advantages. But that is not the truth. The truth is that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they refuse to accept defeat, Kethver said. They will sacrifice everything to protect what they love, but they will also forgive their enemies and offer friendship to those who wronged them. That combination of strength and mercy makes them impossible to conquer and irresistible as allies. The alien veteran stood slowly, his cybernetic limbs whirring softly. Mark my words, journalist. In 50 years, humanity will be the dominant force in galactic politics, not because they conquered anyone, but because everyone will want them as friends. That is the most frightening thing of all. Kethver walked away into the darkness of the cantina, leaving Jorik alone with his recording device and the weight of an incredible story.